There is a moment most people recognize but rarely analyze. You sit down with a clear plan. The work is in front of you. The intention is real. And then, without fully deciding to, you pick up your phone. You scroll for a few minutes. You watch something. You check something. And when you finally put the phone down, the focus is gone, the energy has dropped, and the task feels heavier than it did before. You did not choose to be unproductive. Something in you chose it before you had the chance to think clearly. That is not a character flaw. That is your brain's reward system working exactly the way it was designed to work, just not in the direction you need it to. Understanding why this keeps happening, and why willpower alone almost never fixes it, requires going deeper than most productivity conversations ever go. Because the real problem is not motivation. It is not discipline. It is not even time management. The real problem is that your brain has been quietly trained to prefer easy wins over meaningful effort. And every time that pattern repeats, it becomes more automatic, more invisible, and more resistant to change. The human brain runs on a chemical system that evaluates effort and reward in real time. At the center of this system is dopamine, a neurotransmitter most people associate with pleasure, but which more accurately functions as a signal for anticipated reward. Dopamine does not fire when you feel good. It fires when your brain predicts that something good is about to happen. This is an important distinction because it means your brain is not reacting to the present moment. It is constantly calculating the future, estimating which action will produce the fastest and most reliable return. For most of human history, this system worked well. Effort led to reward. Hunger led to hunting, which led to food. Discomfort led to problem solving, which led to safety. The gap between effort and reward was short enough to keep the system calibrated. But in the modern environment, something fundamental has shifted. The brain now has access to a category of stimulation that produces dopamine almost instantly, with almost no effort required. Social media, short-form video, notifications, quick games, even the act of refreshing an inbox. These are all engineered to give the brain a small but immediate hit of anticipatory dopamine. And because the brain's reward system responds to speed and reliability, not to depth or meaning, it begins to prefer these sources over almost everything else. This is where the sabotage begins. It is not that you are choosing entertainment over discipline. It is that your brain's reward architecture is being restructured every time you take the easy path. Each time you pick up the phone instead of working, you are reinforcing a neural pathway that says, when effort feels uncomfortable, seek quick stimulation. Over time, this pathway becomes dominant. The brain starts rooting around discomfort almost automatically, long before conscious thought can intervene. This is why so many people describe the experience of reaching for their phone without remembering deciding to do it. They did not decide. The brain executed a learned pattern. What makes this especially difficult is that the behavior is not random. It follows a specific psychological loop that researchers have studied in behavioral conditioning for decades. The loop works like this. A cue triggers a craving. The craving drives a routine, and the routine produces a reward that reinforces the entire sequence. In the context of modern distraction, the cue is often the first moment of mental friction, the point where a task becomes challenging or boring or unclear. The craving is not for the phone itself, but for the relief from that friction. The routine is whatever behavior delivers that relief fastest. And the reward is the temporary drop in discomfort, accompanied by that small dopamine signal. Once this loop runs enough times, the cue alone is enough to trigger the entire sequence. You feel the friction, and the behavior is already in motion. This is why trying harder does not work. Willpower is a conscious, deliberate resource. The behavioral loop is unconscious and automatic. You are essentially bringing a rational argument to a neurological reflex. The reflex moves faster. It does not care about your goals. It only cares about reducing discomfort and producing the next available reward. There is another layer here that most people never consider, and it has to do with what repeated, easy stimulation does to the brain's baseline sensitivity. Every neurological system in the human body operates through a process called homeostasis. When something is applied repeatedly, the system adapts to reduce the impact. This is why a person who drinks coffee every morning eventually needs more coffee to feel the same effect. The brain literally recalibrates its receptors to account for the repeated stimulation. The same process happens with dopamine. When the brain is flooded with frequent, low-effort dopamine hits from social media and entertainment, it gradually reduces its sensitivity to those signals. This means that over time, you need more stimulation to feel the same response. And critically, the things that used to feel naturally rewarding, like making progress on a meaningful project, or learning something difficult, or completing a long work session, begin to feel flat by comparison. Not because they have changed, but because your baseline has shifted. This is what overstimulation actually does to productivity. It does not just distract you in the moment, it fundamentally changes what feels rewarding. A person operating at a high dopamine baseline, maintained by constant digital input, will find sustained, effortful work genuinely unrewarding. Not because they are lazy or weak, but because their brain has been calibrated to expect a different kind of stimulation. Mental fatigue, in this sense, is not just tiredness. It is a brain that has burned through its sensitivity reserves and can no longer access the natural satisfaction that comes from meaningful effort. The identity dimension of this problem is often overlooked, but it may be the most important layer of all. Every time you follow through on an intention, something small but real happens in the brain. Your self-model, the internal representation of who you are and what you do, gets updated slightly in the direction of that behavior. Conversely, every time you abandon an intention in favor of immediate relief, that self-model updates in the other direction. Over months and years, this accumulation of small updates creates a deeply held internal narrative. People who have spent years defaulting to comfort over effort do not just have bad habits. They have an identity that is quietly organized around avoidance. And that identity is not visible. It does not announce itself. It just shapes every micro-decision, every moment of friction, every choice between effort and escape in ways that feel entirely natural. This is why behavior change that does not address identity rarely sticks. You can install the best productivity system in the world, and if your internal self-model still says, "I am someone who needs relief from discomfort," the system will eventually collapse. The brain does not follow external structures. It follows the story it believes about itself. So what does the path forward actually look like at a neurological level? It does not start with discipline. It starts with recalibration. The first and most important step is reducing the frequency of high stimulation, low-effort dopamine inputs. Not eliminating them entirely, but creating deliberate gaps. This is not about willpower in the moment. It is about changing the conditions so that the brain has space to reset its sensitivity baseline. When you spend even a few days with significantly reduced digital stimulation, the brain begins to redistribute its dopamine sensitivity toward lower stimulation activities. Boredom, which most people interpret as a problem to be solved, is actually a neurological signal that the brain is recalibrating. Sitting with it, rather than immediately filling it, is one of the most powerful things a person can do to restore natural motivation. The second shift is structural, because the behavioral loop is triggered by cues. Changing the cue changes the loop. This means designing your physical and digital environment to remove or reduce the triggers that initiate avoidance behavior. If the phone is within reach, it is a cue. If a browser tab is open, it is a cue. If notifications are enabled, every sound is a cue. This is not about self-control. It is about accepting that your brain is responding to signals in its environment, and that controlling those signals is more effective than trying to override the response after it has already begun. Attention is not just a mental resource. It is an environmental one. The third shift is about reframing what progress feels like in the early stages. When someone begins reducing easy stimulation and engaging in more effortful work, the initial experience is often deeply uncomfortable. The work feels unrewarding. The focus feels fragile. The brain protests. This is not failure. This is the recalibration process in motion. Understanding this neurologically changes how you interpret the discomfort. It is not a signal that you are doing something wrong. It is a signal that your reward system is adjusting. The discomfort is the mechanism. People who understand this are far more likely to stay with the process than people who interpret the discomfort as evidence that they are not cut out for it. Over time, and this timeline is different for everyone, the brain does rebalance. The sensitivity returns. Effortful work begins to feel naturally rewarding again. Focus becomes less of a battle and more of a state that the brain can access without constantly fighting its own circuitry. But this only happens when the conditions for it are consistently created, not through intense willpower, but through structural changes, environmental design, and a genuine understanding of what the brain is actually doing at every step. What is worth sitting with, after all of this, is a simple but quietly profound realization. You are not failing at discipline because you are weak. You are navigating a brain that was built for a world that no longer exists, operating inside a modern environment that is specifically engineered to exploit its oldest preferences. The easy wins feel good because your biology says they should. The resistance to hard work is not a personality trait. It is a predictable neurological response to the conditions your brain has been living in. When you see it that way, the problem does not feel personal. It feels solvable. And the solution is not about becoming someone who never seeks comfort. It is about slowly, deliberately rebuilding an environment and an identity where the brain's reward system and your actual goals are no longer working against each other. That realignment does not happen overnight, but understanding the mechanism is the beginning of it.